I knew something wasn't right the very moment I saw that black SUV roll into my driveway. From a distance, it looked like any other vehicle, old and slightly worn out, the kind of car you'd expect to see parked at a strip mall or maybe sitting abandoned at a gas station. But as it crept closer, I noticed something that made my stomach twist. On the side, slapped unevenly across the door, were magnetic decals that read HO Police. Not City Police, not Sheriff's Department. No, this was something far stranger. Now, I've dealt with strange before. In my line of work, strange is practically routine. But this was different. My own neighborhood had apparently decided it could run its own police department. And not just that, they were here for me. Let me back up. A few weeks earlier, I had just moved into what was supposed to be a quiet suburban community, the kind of place with neatly trimmed hedges, kids riding bikes down the cul-de-sac, and neighbors waving at you while they watered their lawns. Picture perfect, safe, normal. And of course, it came with a homeowners association, the dreaded HO. Now, I knew what I was signing up for. Or at least, I thought I did. I expected the usual rules. No RVs parked in the driveway. Mow your lawn every so often. Keep your fence painted. That kind of thing. Annoying? Yes. But tolerable. What I didn't expect was the president of the HO, a man named Mr. Collins, who carried himself less like a volunteer community leader and more like a dictator on a power trip. The very first day I moved in, before I'd even finished unloading boxes, Collins showed up at my door, clipboard in hand, a smug grin plastered on his face, and an attitude that told me everything I needed to know. He started pointing out violations before I'd even unpacked. My mailbox wasn't the right height. My curtains didn't meet community color standards. My driveway had a tiny oil stain, something he claimed was a major infraction. Now, I could have told him right then and there to back off. I could have flashed my badge and ended the nonsense before it started. But that's not my style. See, I work for the FBI, and years in the field have taught me one thing. Sometimes it's better to let people reveal just how far they're willing to go before you step in. Collins? He had no idea who he was dealing with. Over the next couple of weeks, the harassment escalated. Every time I came home, there was a new violation notice taped to my door. My grass was too green. My trash bins weren't facing the right direction. And my personal favorite, my government-issued black sedan looked too official and was making the neighbors uncomfortable. That one almost made me laugh, because if only Collins knew the truth. But of course, I couldn't exactly explain why I drove the car I did. I could see what was happening. Collins wasn't just enforcing rules. He was testing me, trying to break me down, to show me that in this neighborhood, his word was law. And the thing about people like Collins is, once you give them an inch, they'll take a mile. The breaking point came one Saturday morning. I was in my kitchen making coffee, still half asleep, when I heard a pounding on my door, loud, aggressive, the kind of knock that tells you whoever's on the other side thinks they own the place. I opened it, and that's when I saw them. Two men stood there in cheap uniforms that looked like they'd been ordered off the internet. Their badges were plastic, flimsy things you'd expect to see at a Halloween party, not on someone claiming authority. One of them had a pair of plastic handcuffs dangling from his belt, like he'd just walked off a toy store aisle. And behind them, in my driveway, idled that black SUV with the HOA police decals. They didn't ask. They barked. "Step outside, sir. You're under arrest for repeated HOA violations." For a second, I thought it was some kind of prank. I actually almost laughed. But when I looked into their eyes, I realized they were dead serious. These men weren't joking. They really believed they had the right to put me in cuffs. Neighbors started trickling out of their houses, curious about the commotion. Phones came out. People started recording. And suddenly, this wasn't just a bizarre situation, it was a public spectacle. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I knew I had to play this carefully. "Under what authority?" I asked calmly. One of the fake officers squared his shoulders and replied, "The whole police department has jurisdiction here. You failed to comply with multiple citations." That's when it clicked. These weren't just clowns. They were dangerous clowns. And the circus was about to get very real. I kept my face neutral. "All right," I said evenly. "Let me just grab my ID." I stepped back into my house, heart pounding but expression calm. Because when I walked back out, I wasn't holding my driver's license. I was holding my real FBI badge. The moment their eyes landed on it, their faces drained of color. And that, right there, was the turning point. The look on their faces was priceless. You could almost hear the gears turning in their heads as they tried to process what they were seeing. Just seconds earlier, they'd been puffing their chests out, trying to intimidate me with their toy badges and borrowed authority. But now they were staring at the unmistakable gold shield of the FBI. For a long beat, nobody moved. The two self-proclaimed officers shifted uncomfortably, glancing at each other, silently begging the other to say something first. Behind them, neighbors were whispering, some gasping, others chuckling. One even muttered loud enough for everyone to hear, "Told you this whole nonsense would blow up." Finally, one of the men stammered, This doesn't change the fact that you're in violation of HOA." I cut him off with a sharp look. "Do you have any idea what kind of trouble you're in right now? Impersonating law enforcement, attempted unlawful arrest, intimidation? You don't even realize how deep the hole is you're digging for yourselves." The taller one opened his mouth to argue, but before he could get a word out, a familiar voice boomed from across the street. "Stand down, gentlemen. I'll handle this." There he was, Mr. Collins, strutting toward us like he was a general marching into battle. Clipboard under his arm, sunglasses perched on his face despite the cloudy sky, and that same smug expression I'd come to know all too well. The crowd parted for him, and in that moment, you would have thought he was some kind of celebrity. He thrived on the attention, soaking it in, clearly convinced that he was untouchable. Agent or not, Collins sneered, "You are still subject to the rules of this community. And I assure you, my officers were acting under my full authority." I raised an eyebrow. "Your authority? Interesting. Because the last time I checked, homeowners associations don't have legal power to create police departments. Unless, of course, you've decided to secede from the United States and start your own country here in the cul-de-sac." A ripple of laughter spread through the neighbors. Colin's jaw tightened, but he pushed on. "This is not a joke. The HOA exists to preserve order. Without rules, without structure, chaos will take over. And I, as president, have sworn to protect this neighborhood from exactly that kind of decay." There it was. The speech, the power trip laid bare for everyone to see. And the more he talked, the clearer it became. This wasn't about protecting the community. This was about control. Collins didn't want order. He wanted obedience. I let him finish, then stepped forward, voice low but steady. "You're done, Collins. You've crossed the line from nuisance into criminal territory. And the thing about lines? Once you cross them, there's no going back." Eho, president smirked. "Criminal territory? Please, do you really think anyone outside this neighborhood cares about what we do here? We're self-governing. That's what makes us strong. And if you don't like it, maybe you don't belong here." The arrogance was staggering. He truly believed he was untouchable. I could see it in his eyes, the certainty that the neighbors would back him, that his little HOA police force would keep me in check. But what Collins hadn't counted on was just how fed up everyone already was. A voice piped up from the crowd. "This has gone too far, Collins." It was Mrs. Henderson, the sweet elderly woman who lived 2 doors down. She was usually quiet, polite, never one to get involved in drama. But now she was practically shouting, "You fined me $300 last month for planting tulips that weren't on your approved list. $300 for flowers." Another neighbor jumped in. "Yeah, and you made me repaint my shed twice because you didn't like the shade of white. Who even cares?" And then another, and another. Suddenly, it wasn't just me standing up to Collins. It was half the neighborhood. One by one, they started voicing their frustrations, each story worse than the last. Collins' so-called authority was unraveling right in front of him. I crossed my arms, watching him squirm. "Seems like your kingdom isn't as loyal as you thought," Collins snapped, his face flushing red. "Enough. You people don't understand what's at stake. Without me, this place will fall apart." I took a step closer, lowering my voice so only he could hear. "No, Collins. Without you, this place might finally start to heal." For the first time since I'd met him, his confidence faltered. Just for a moment, I saw it, the crack in his armor, and I knew it was only a matter of time before it shattered completely. But he wasn't finished yet. Not by a long shot. Collins wasn't ready to surrender, not yet. His voice shook with desperation, but he raised it high enough to drown out the angry neighbors. "You're all being manipulated. This man is twisting your words, turning you against me. I have sacrificed more than any of you to keep this neighborhood safe. Without my leadership, you'd all be living in chaos. Safe. The word hung in the air like a bad joke. The same man who created fake police, who fined people for flowers and paint shades, was now pretending to be the savior of the community. But the crowd wasn't buying it anymore. The whispers grew louder, frustration bubbling into outright defiance. People were shaking their heads, rolling their eyes, and one even shouted, "Safe? You're the reason we're all miserable." Colin's eyes darted left and right, searching for support, searching for even a single nod of agreement. But there was nothing. The wall of loyalty he thought he'd built had crumbled into rubble, and all that remained was the truth staring him in the face. He tried to rally his two so-called officers, snapping his fingers at them like a drill sergeant. "Arrest him. Do your job." But neither moved. They avoided his gaze, their earlier bravado completely gone. One of them even mumbled, "We didn't sign up for this." The crowd erupted into laughter, and that laughter cut deeper than any insult. Colin's empire of intimidation was collapsing, not with a bang, but with the sound of his neighbors mocking him. I leaned in, voice sharp. "It's over, Collins. No more threats. No more fake rules. No more bullying. This neighborhood doesn't belong to you. It belongs to everyone standing here." His jaw clenched. "You think you've won? You have no idea what you're dealing with. I have files, records, evidence of every single violation. Fines, reports, documentation, everything. If I go down, I'm taking all of you with me." That was his last card. Fear. Fear of exposure. Fear of losing what little power he had left. But this time, no one flinched. Instead, a woman from the back shouted, "Good. Release the files. Let everyone see how ridiculous you are." The crowd roared in agreement. For the first time, neighbors weren't afraid of him. They were united, voices strong, no longer whispering behind closed doors. Colin's confidence cracked further. Sweat beaded on his forehead, his hands twitching nervously at the edges of his clipboard. He could feel it, the shift in the air, the control slipping from his grasp. And then came the moment he'd been dreading. A black SUV rolled slowly into the cul-de-sac, its tinted windows reflecting the stunned faces of the crowd. The vehicle stopped, and two real federal agents stepped out, suits crisp, badges glinting. The laughter died instantly. Silence fell like a heavy blanket. All eyes turned to Collins, whose face drained of color. "Mr. Collins," one of the agents called out firmly, "we need to have a word." The whole president froze, his clipboard slipping from his hand and hitting the pavement with a dull thud. His little kingdom, his illusion of power, was crumbling in front of the very people he thought he controlled. Neighbors exchanged glances of anticipation. Some smiled, others whispered, and a few even pulled out their phones to record. They knew this was the moment, the beginning of the end for the tyrant of their neighborhood. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The sight of the agents approaching spoke louder than anything I could have added. This wasn't my fight anymore. Collins had declared war on everyone, and now justice was finally catching up to him. The agents walked straight past the crowd and stopped directly in front of Collins. One of them opened a folder, his voice calm but firm. "We've received reports of impersonating law enforcement, fraudulent activity, and misuse of community funds. We need you to come with us." Gasps echoed through the cul-de-sac. Collins tried to protest, his voice trembling. "This is a mistake. They don't understand. I was protecting them." But no one believed him anymore. The neighbors didn't rush to defend him. They didn't plead for leniency. They just stood in silence, watching as the man who once terrorized them was finally facing consequences he could no longer escape. Collins' kingdom had fallen, and the neighborhood would never be the same again. The agent's words hit Collins like a hammer. His mouth opened and closed, searching for the right excuse, the right spin, the right way to wriggle free. But there was nothing left. The air was thick, heavy, the kind of silence that comes before a storm. "I don't know what you think you're doing," he finally stammered, pointing a trembling finger at the agents. "This is my community. I am the authority here." But even as he said it, his voice cracked, betraying the truth. The authority he once wielded had evaporated, leaving him standing exposed in front of the very people he had controlled with fear. The lead agent didn't flinch. "Sir, step forward." Slowly, Collins' knees buckled slightly, but he forced himself upright, pride battling panic. His eyes darted toward the neighbors, scanning the crowd for sympathy, for a single nod of support. All he found were cold stares and crossed arms. One man called out, "Where's your fake police now, Collins?" The crowd erupted in laughter again, and this time even the agents smirked. Collins snapped, "You'll regret this. All of you. When I'm gone, you'll realize I was the only thing standing between order and chaos." But his words carried no weight anymore. The neighbors weren't afraid. They were empowered. Years of silence had erupted into unity, and there was no going back. The agents took his arms, securing him with handcuffs that glinted under the streetlights. The sound of the metal clicking shut echoed like a final verdict. And then it happened, something Collins had never experienced. Applause. The neighbors started clapping. First a few, then all of them, their cheers rising like a wave crashing down on him. The sound was deafening, a celebration of freedom from his iron grip. Collins twisted, trying to face them. His face was red with fury, veins bulging at his temples. "You think this is over?" he roared. "You'll come crawling back to me. You'll beg for me when everything falls apart." But no one begged. No one even argued. Instead, they laughed, clapped louder, and some even shouted, "Good riddance." The agents guided him toward the SUV, but Collins made one last desperate move. He stopped dead in his tracks, planting his feet like a child refusing to be dragged away. His voice cracked as he screamed, "I have files. I have everything you've ever done. Parking violations, fence heights, even those who didn't mow their lawns. You'll all regret this. The neighbors only laughed harder. A woman shouted, "Post them online, Collins. We'd love to see." Another chimed in, "Go ahead. Nothing you've got matters anymore." Collins' face twisted in rage, but the fight was gone. His power had been broken, shattered by the one thing he could never control: unity. The SUV door opened, and with a final push, the agents placed him inside. The door slammed shut, sealing his fate. For a moment, the cul-de-sac was still. The neighbors stood frozen, watching the black SUV roll slowly out of the neighborhood, tail lights glowing like the end of a long nightmare. Then the silence broke. Cheers exploded, people hugging, high-fiving, some even tearing up. After years of fear and fines, after endless threats and intimidation, they were finally free. I stood back, watching it all unfold. This wasn't just a victory over one man. It was the rebirth of a community. People who once barely spoke to each other were now laughing together, united by what they had endured. And deep down, I knew Colin's downfall had changed more than just their neighborhood. It had lit a fire. A reminder that when people stand together, no tyrant, no bully, no self-proclaimed king can hold power forever. The neighbors would rebuild, stronger than before. And as for Collins, his kingdom was gone, stripped away in front of the very people he thought he ruled. This time, it was truly over. The neighborhood felt lighter the very next morning. For the first time in years, people opened their curtains without dread. Lawns were no longer inspected by binoculars from a self-proclaimed enforcer. The constant letters, fines, and threats had vanished overnight, like a storm finally passing. Neighbors began walking over to each other's driveways, introducing themselves, shaking hands, even sharing coffee. People who had avoided one another for years out of fear of being reported now laughed together, united by relief. The cul-de-sac wasn't silent anymore. Kids played freely, chalk drawings on the sidewalks, bikes left on lawns, things Collins would have fined them for instantly. But now, these little violations became symbols of freedom. But the community knew they couldn't just celebrate. They had to rebuild. And hope without leadership is like a ship without a captain. Yet this time, they weren't about to crown another dictator. They were determined to do it differently. A week later, they gathered at the community center. Dozens showed up, filling the room with nervous excitement. At the front, a few neighbors set up a simple microphone. "We can't let this happen again," one resident said firmly. "We need rules, sure, but not tyranny. We need fairness, transparency, and leadership we can trust." For the first time, the whole meeting wasn't tense or hostile. It was hopeful. Neighbors volunteered to form a new board, one with term limits, open voting, and community-wide decision-making. They set up guidelines that required financial transparency and even created a rotating oversight committee to prevent any one person from hoarding power again. It was messy, of course. People disagreed on lawn heights, parking spaces, and mailbox paint. But the difference was stunning. Debates ended in laughter. Compromises were reached, and no one stormed out in fear. The neighborhood was finally acting like a community, not a kingdom. And what about Collins? After the SUV carried him away, rumors swirled. Some said he'd face charges for impersonating law enforcement. Others whispered about fraud, extortion, and misuse of HOA funds. The agents never revealed the full scope of his crimes, but one thing was certain: his reign was finished. Then came the twist no one saw coming. During the restructuring of the HOA, while cleaning out old files from the community office, they discovered a locked cabinet that Collins had kept hidden. Inside were stacks of folders, detailed records he had kept on every neighbor. Not just violations, but private notes, arguments overheard, visitors who came by, even photos taken without permission. The neighbors stared in shock. This man was spying on us, one woman gasped. For years. At first, there was outrage. The level of obsession, the invasion of privacy, it was worse than anyone imagined. But instead of letting the files tear them apart, they chose something unexpected. They gathered in the community center, piled the papers high in a metal bin, and one by one, each neighbor dropped in a match. The fire roared, consuming Collins' control, page by page. The neighbors stood in silence, watching the smoke rise into the night sky, a final cleansing of the years they had endured. When the last ember died, someone whispered, "He thought he owned us." But we were never his to own. The neighborhood moved forward. Cookouts were planned, block parties organized, and slowly, the scars of Collins' reign began to heal. The HOA wasn't perfect. No HOA ever is. But now it belonged to the people, not a tyrant. And every time they passed the spot where Collins had been cuffed and shoved into that black SUV, they remembered one simple truth: when people unite, no bully, no fraud, no self-made king can ever stand against them. Months passed. Seasons shifted. What had once been a neighborhood living under constant surveillance now felt alive again. But even as life settled, the shadow of Collins lingered like a stubborn stain. At first, people whispered about him in passing. "Did you hear what happened at his trial?" Someone said he tried to represent himself in court. Apparently, he still thinks he was in the right. The man who once strutted down the street with a clipboard and smug grin was now reduced to nothing more than gossip and rumor. Eventually, official word came. Collins was convicted, not just for impersonation and harassment, but for embezzlement. Turns out, he'd been pocketing HOA funds for years, funneling them into a private account under a shell company. The money was gone, wasted on petty luxuries, designer furniture, ridiculous security gadgets, even a custom throne-like chair he kept in his living room. When neighbors heard the details, they weren't even angry anymore. They just shook their heads. His empire had always been a lie, built on intimidation and fear. Without that illusion, he was nothing. But here's the strange part. Collins never apologized. At his sentencing, he stood there, sweating under the fluorescent lights of the courtroom, and shouted about how the neighborhood would collapse without him. He claimed he was the only one who kept order, the only one who cared. The judge didn't flinch. The sentence was handed down. Collins was taken away, kicking and screaming, still insisting he was the president of something that no longer existed. Back in the neighborhood, people adjusted to life without him. Slowly, new traditions grew. A community garden sprouted in what had once been Collins' perfectly trimmed lawn. Kids organized lemonade stands at the end of the cul-de-sac. Adults created a neighbor's night potluck every Friday. The real miracle wasn't that Collins was gone. It was that people had learned to lean on each other again. They laughed louder. They argued less. And when disagreements did happen, they resolved them like neighbors, not subjects under a ruler. Still, every now and then, there were reminders. An anonymous letter slipped into someone's mailbox, unsigned. A strange figure spotted in the distance, sitting in a parked car too long. Neighbors would trade uneasy glances and ask, "Do you think it's him?" No one knew for sure. Maybe Collins was gone for good, shackled by the weight of his own arrogance. Or maybe he was out there, somewhere, still convinced that his authority would someday return. But here's the thing about fear. It only has power if you let it. And this time, the neighbors didn't. One evening, at a community bonfire, someone raised a glass and said, "To freedom from fear, from fraud, from fake authority." The group cheered. The flames crackled. And in that moment, the neighborhood wasn't just a collection of houses anymore. It was a family. And if Collins ever did come back, he'd find a community stronger than ever, united, watchful, and ready. Because once you've seen behind the curtain of a bully's illusion, you can never be fooled again. The HOA was no longer a dictatorship. It was a living reminder that power belongs to the people, not to the loudest voice or the shiniest badge. And as the stars spread across the sky that night, one truth rang louder than Collins' threats ever had. A neighborhood united is unbreakable.